I'm Mallory Extine, and today I'm going to talk about the transplantation of the human consciousness. This experiment is an attempt to defy the laws of mortality, an attempt to transplant the human consciousness of an old or dying person into a newer, healthier body. At the moment, the farthest neuroscience has come in the experimentation of brains is in making the brain function outside of the body. Because the brain is able to survive without a body, Nenad Sistan, the man leading this research, claims that one day there will be a way to allow the brain to survive forever through medical transplantation. Nenad Sistan, a neuroscientist at Yale University, has spent most of his life studying the brain. Because of this, he believes that with enough research and experimentation, it'll be possible to perform a brain transplant so meticulously that the brain will remain intact, allowing the consciousness of the brain to transfer with it. Though the farthest Hassan has gone with this is through experimentation on live pigs, he plans to transition to human beings before long. Sistan has passed this off as a way to do research on the living brain without harming the person it is attached to, but he's mentioned several times that his end goal is the transplant of the human consciousness. Now, I'm sure many people, including myself, think of this as a far off concept, but the reality is this isn't an impossible idea. Yes, it would be extremely difficult to successfully transplant a brain without worrying about keeping the patient's identity intact now, but as technology progresses, the end goal is becoming more and more attainable. Now, you might find yourself thinking that you've heard of this before, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. The idea of brain transplants, or consciousness transplants to put it in context, has been a concept presented in the media for years. More recently, movies like Jordan Peele's Get Out have been extremely similar to this concept. The irony of this comes from the fact that Peele wasn't trying to make this a relatable concept. He wanted to point out how absurd the idea of transplanting the human consciousness would sound, when in reality, the exact science that we criticize throughout the movie is being tested in real life. Peele utilized this as an opportunity to explain that we don't really have as full of a grasp on the progress of technology as we think. Other extremely popular movies and TV shows have approached the same concept, making it seem futuristic or unattainable. The show Upload, which was actually released this year, introduces the idea that the conscience could be put on a hard drive, allowing it to be uploaded into a virtual afterlife. This, similar to Get Out, proposes that we can cheat death through technology. And to be honest, we really can thank modern technology for medical procedures that have postponed death. The reality is, there might be a way to achieve this so called futuristic goal. While the main point of my presentation is to talk about the experiment itself, there are several repercussions that have to be explored subsequently. Because Sistan is using live pigs to practice on, rather than people, I've done a lot of research on animal experimentation and the moral implications that has. Vivisection, the science of experimenting on live animals, has been around for centuries. That being said, it's become a sort of established ideal that vivisection is no longer considered morally right. So, why is Sistan still doing it? It presents a huge moral issue. How intelligent does an animal really have to be to save its species from experimentation? I also had the chance to explore the history of transplants and past attempts to successfully perform experiments similar to this one. The closest we've come, in case you were wondering, is the transplantation of a dog's head onto another dog, which is actually the reason we know how to perform coronary artery bypasses. Vladimir Demikov, the man who transplanted the dogs, actually had to learn how to perform a coronary artery bypass on the dog, so we wouldn't know how to do that without him. That brings up the topic of moral issues with live experimentation, because without it, we wouldn't have several of the medical advancements that we do now. Several human beings have been tortured and experimented on in the past in the name of science, and although we say we would never subject another human, or animal for that matter, to such torture again, we have them to thank for the modern medical procedures that we have today. Of course, Sistan is still using pigs rather than humans, but pigs have been proven to be extremely intelligent and self aware, so what about them? I've also had to explore the existential implications this has. If there was scientific proof that the human consciousness comes from the brain rather than the soul, what does that mean for religion? There are so many religious beliefs founded on the concept of a soul rather than consciousness of the brain that the success of this experiment would mean shaking the foundation of religion as we know it. There are plenty of ways to approach the nuances of this experiment. Not only are there moral implications, but there are also technological advancements that could prevent the use of more than one human body completely. For example, another concept commonly presented in fictional media, like this picture here, and in other movies and TV shows, is the transplant of the human consciousness in robots, or artificial intelligence. AI combined with human intelligence is already a known concept, but it has become more intertwined in the last decade or so. Because of this, we're approaching the idea of robot bodies with human minds. So, to wrap this up, I want to establish that it's extremely unlikely that this is going to happen in our lifetime. Even though technology continues to progress, it would require technology we've yet to discover to perform a surgical procedure as complicated as this. We also have to make sure to note that even though we don't find it to be an ethical practice anymore, we have to keep the lives of those who are lost through experimentation in our thoughts. We wouldn't have the technology to do this without them after all. It's likely that we don't even know all of the technology that's available to us right now, nor do we know about a lot of the scientific advancements that are already being made. Public information is rarely the full story. And yes, even though animal experimentation is still inhumane, there are ways to respect the lives of animals and still be able to have them help us in our journey towards scientific progress. So, that's all I have to say, and thank y'all for listening.